welcome to our IoT Tech Talk as part of SparkFest. Welcome to Canada Bay City Libraries and the Learning Space course. Just before we start, I'd like to do a quick acknowledgement of country. So I would like to acknowledge the Wongal people of the Eora Nation, the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today, and pay my respect to elders past, present, and emerging. So today we've got a little panel discussion as part of SparkFest 2020. We're joined today by Steph Kelly, Manager of Place at City of Canada Bay, Frank Zeichner, who is the CEO of the IOT Alliance and Industry Associate Professor at UTS, and Dr. Melinda Dunstan of UNSW Built Environment Faculty, Computational Design Discipline. And we're going to be talking about, well, these guys are going to be talking about IoT, Internet of Data of Things, and how that, just really kind of introducing IoT technologies to a kind of general audience. So we'll kick it off with Steph. Take it away.
So I'm Steph Kelly. I manage places in the City of Canada Bay. It's here in the inner west of Sydney and spans from Rhodes in the west through to Drummoyne. And we've got beautiful parks and you're all welcome to come and enjoy our places. I'm really delighted to be here as part of this conversation about the Internet of Things, because for me it's all about creating better places and places that deliver more to the people who enjoy, who meet there, who play there, who work there. Frank.
Thanks, Stephanie. My name is Frank Zeichner. I'm the CEO of the Internet of Things Alliance Australia. We are the peak industry body for IoT in Australia, and our remit is to accelerate the adoption of IoT in Australia for our comparative advantage and for societal benefit. We look across the entire economy, including cities and places, food and ag, manufacturing, health, transport, and water. So Internet of Things affects everything and everyone, and so very hot topic.
Thanks, Frank. My name is Melinda Dunstan and I'm an academic at the University of New South Wales. I teach in the discipline of computational design and I teach human-machine interaction. So I'm involved in training the next generation of architects and computational designers who are going to be thinking about the space between these huge amounts of data that we are collecting and the real world, and how to bring those together in meaningful and ethical, impactful ways.
Thanks, Melinda. And we're starting with you. How did you get involved with the Internet of Things?
Sure. I began my academic training as an artist in a long time ago, and now I did my PhD in the Creative Robotics Lab, and in that lab was my first contact with the Internet of Things, where artists were bringing materials and objects that they had made and wanting to pair them together with real-time data from the internet as a sort of data visualization, a way of showing people the information that they wouldn't usually have access to. And now in the Faculty of Built Environment, I teach computational designers to think about the Internet of Things in relation to the built environment. So how can we build architecture that acknowledges its inhabitants? How can we plan landscape architecture that cares for and acknowledges those who occupy the space? And I also teach robotic furniture, so thinking about translating the needs of users into the furniture that is inside their homes.
And are there any good examples?
Yeah, right now I've got some fantastic second-year students who are planning an interactive facade, just a wall inside the gallery space at UNSW, and this really stemmed from their experience of being isolated during the last year, really, and sometimes being inside and not being aware of what's happening with others or even of changes in the weather outside. And so they're planning these beautiful affective facades that communicate maybe how many other students are currently studying on campus, or just pick up changes in the wind outside and let them know that the weather is changing even though they've been inside studying and working for a lot of hours. So just connecting interior and exterior during a time that we've really been trapped inside for a lot of the year. So there's some really interesting projects, and because they're working from home, they're using found objects in their home and then connecting them up with just really basic electronics. So we're getting some really beautiful combinations of analog found aesthetics that are being actuated by big data from the internet, and I really love that combination of those two coming together.
I love the way you reveal information. It's really
yeah.
And Frank, you've got a really important job now in the Internet of Things, I guess. But how did you first get involved? How did you kind of become who you are today?
Well, my background has been telecommunications, and about 5 or 6 years ago, a colleague of mine and I started seeing lots of Internet of Things happening. Not because it hasn't been happening for years; it hasn't called Internet of Things a long time ago, and we were seeing various countries taking initiative in Asia, in the US. And we thought, what's happening in Australia? And there was no focal point for industry, there's no focal point for government, so we decided to create an association. It seems to be a big thing in Australia. More associations per capita, I think, than anywhere in the world. And the way we thought of it at the time, and I still think of it that way, is that the internet itself utterly changed our lives. It utterly changed the way we communicate. It, for example, changed the number of billable hours for lawyers, which is pretty weird. It changed the business model for lawyers because all of a sudden people did their own searching instead of lawyers employing people to search for them. And so the Internet of Things has a way more pervasive thing. Where now all of a sudden things and objects and states and places are now identified by data, and then you can use it. Some really obvious examples are Uber. Knowing where all the cars are and where the people are who want the cars is a classic example of the Internet of Things working. Airbnb, knowing where all the vacant beds are that people want to sell. That's really practical stuff, but it affects all industries. So one of the most successful horticulturalists in Australia, called Costa Foods, they're the biggest producer of blueberries, strawberries, citrus. They have 65 farms, 2/3 of them are undercover, completely controlled, climate controlled. They're sensed for wind, fertilise, etc. All through the chain. They use a quarter of the water. Their yield is higher. Their quality is better. So here's a classic case of an industry, a major industry player that used the Internet of Things. They increased their share value by 5 in 5 years, and they got better food. They're the biggest suppliers in Australia and the big exporter. So there's 3 examples. It'll affect all our lives. And when I talk about the Internet of Things today, I imagine my granddaughter, who will say to me, and she's 3 now, or 3 next week, Granddad, how didn't you know? Because there are things that we go around blithely unaware of our environment, blithely unaware of how we waste, blithely unaware of how we use things. That information can and probably will be available to us to make choices. And that's a good sign of the Internet of Things. There are some downsides that we need to manage along that process, and that's also part of what I'm looking at. So we need to somehow control our own destiny in how the Internet of Things is applied. That's the key before it descends upon us and we don't have a say.
I think that's really interesting, because what struck me, what you've both said, was really about a collaboration or a bringing together of the internet and I don't know that's in the name, the Internet of Things, but it was that use of sort of knowledge and practice, and like it really is about transforming our lives in that way. And I guess you've mentioned some of the things that really excite you, Frank. What really excites you, Melinda?
About the Internet of Things? Yeah. Look, I think it's something that Frank touched on very lightly there, but I'm really excited about projects that bring awareness and behavioural change in communities. So one example that I really love at the moment is was founded in Amsterdam. It's called Tree Wi-Fi, and there's just little bird boxes attached to trees in local areas, and they've got a nitrogen oxide sensor and then a Wi-Fi router, and really they just when the nitrogen oxide in the air dips below a certain level and they've got good air quality, then it emits free Wi-Fi for the local residents. So it brings attention to and encourages the local residents to ride their bikes or take public transport, and they almost see an immediate result and benefit from that in a way that's a little more tangible. Okay, great, I've got free Wi-Fi rather than I've got air in my lungs of a higher quality. But it just brings local awareness to a community, to their impact on their immediate environment, and how small behavioural changes can actually lead to real-world consequences for the environment. So it's projects like that, and it's just really simple. It's quite a simple mechanism, really, but the impact is really significant. So I'm excited about projects like that.
Great.
And look, and moving on from that theme, indeed, for me, that and the collaboration is that that over the next 10 or 20 years, more data will be generated by individuals than by companies, by government. So the question is, what part of that should be influencing what we do, and how they might contribute. A classic case that people understand is solar panels. You know, we have tremendous penetration of solar panels in Australia, and the data about what you're generating and what you're feeding back into the grid, and how that's balanced with the grid or whatever it's going to become, the sort of microgrid, is really vital in how we manage what's invested in the back end and how much the cost of energy will be. Now, that's one part of it, but the next part of it is the behavioural side, i.e. will people want to contribute to putting in energy when there's a shortfall, or turning off the air conditioner when there isn't, and making that information available and having them participate in that process makes it an organic thing. Now, you know, some people might cry in horror and go, "Oh my God, this is a chaotic model," and it is. But you know, there's something quite stable about a chaotic model when there's enough people in it, and it reflects our society. So some way in which you can transparently understand what you're doing and participating in the process helps us all with something as fundamental as electricity, with water, with food waste, with all of those things. So it's that community connecting in to business and to government. That's a sort of it's a pivotal moment in our lives, and it'll affect what our children and our children's children will live in. So I'm fascinated by it, frightened by it, but excited by it at the same time.
I love it. It's the Internet of Things developing relationships, not just between each other, but with our environment, which is really important. If you want great places, and like you say, if you want great lives long term.
Yeah.
What do you see as the commercial opportunities? You've mentioned a few, but what are the future kind of commercial opportunities that you see coming out of this?
Well, there are just millions, really, and it's a bit hard to. I go from the sublime to the ridiculous. I mean, the big to the little, or whatever. But for example, Australia produces and exports about $45 billion worth of food. So by using the Internet of Things, we can do two things. When it gets to the other end of the market, it's 300 billion, by the way. 300 billion. So firstly, we're not getting enough share of the value of the food because we're not representing what it is in terms of data to the end customer. And two, our productivity on our farms can be enhanced tremendously by better use of water. I mean, the example of Costa Foods earlier. So commercial opportunity for food and export, massive. The target is 100 billion by 2030. That's one. Let me give you a small example inside. This is one of my favourite ones, the oyster farming thing. And people go, Internet of Things, oyster farming, how could these things be related in any way? Well, oysters are filter feeding organs, and they live in seawater. And when it rains, and by estuaries, and when it rains, water comes down the estuary and often brings pollutants, and then next thing you know, the oysters are gone, they're out. So there's a health regulation that says when it rains, you have to lift them out of the water. So that's what they do. And they've been using Bureau of Meteorology information, which is great, but often that's 10 kilometres away or 20 kilometres away. And by the time, and every estuary is different, every bay is different. And so they're not locally sensing what the situation is, they're remotely sensing it. So by placing salinity sensors in the water. They've got a proxy for whether or not it's polluted or not. And they also know the tide height, so when they can send people in to lift it up, etc. And the result has been an average of 30 days saved in not waiting and by lifting it up at the right time. 30 days saved often is a value of up to $10,000 to $100,000 per oyster farmer. And because they grow more. So here's a classic case, and the beauty of it is the data that goes to the oyster farmer goes to the regulator who manages the lifting it up and down. So safety is at the same time, data is collected centrally and distributed to places. That's the Internet of Things. There's a classic one, and that's a business model that works for the tech supplier and for the farmer and also for the consumer.
Are there any trends from your students have you seen where they're interested in and where they're wanting to go?
That's an interesting question. I suppose all of the examples that Frank has given combine both making and technology and computational design. So I'm quite interested to see how that will feed back down into education and the way we train students. So even this year we're including more making-based subjects and hands-on subjects for our students to really get a sense of how things that they design for online feed into the real world and what that response might be and how sustainable that response is. Like, it's all well and good to plan this wonderful mechanism that lifts in and out, but if you design a mechanism that only works 6 times and breaks on the 7th, then we don't have any progress for our oysters. So I think it'll be interesting to see how it affects tertiary education and the nature of courses and this sort of agility between what has been previously quite siloed areas of training in kind of hands-on materiality and then computational design or coding, and those have been 2 quite separate worlds. And so understanding how all those fit together, I think that might be an interesting thing. And so the students have struggled with that a little this year. I think they're coming to terms, they prefer to work on their computer, but they're coming to terms with making things with their hands, and that's actually kind of having this bi-directional shaping of what they plan on their computers to something that they realize that gravity is a thing, friction is a thing. There's kind of coming to terms with the materiality of their ideas. So I'm interested to see what will happen there.
That's really exciting.
That sort of goes on to another concept, because for me, the Internet of Things is this magical translation from the physical to the virtual. Yeah. So that is that boundary, and of course it's not just the translation from the physical to the digital, but also back from the digital to the physical, and so that process is what's utterly fascinating, and the idea of sort of coding what the physical looks like in the middle is sort of like the nirvana. And you may have heard of a couple of new concepts called like digital twin, which sort of tries to mirror the world. Of course, the digital mirror will always be a subset of what the real world is, never be completely accurate. And so we have to be really careful that we're not making assumptions about the digital representation of the world, incomplete as it is, for extrapolating things that might have secondary effects we haven't even thought about. So thinking these things through is, in specific cases, is the key, not trying to design the Uber universe and find out we've just actually done something we didn't want to do.
Yeah, and I think, having that dialogue as part of your planning and design stages, I think, rather than, oopsie, we've planned these 2 outcomes and they don't fit together anymore. So
so that learning by design and actually experiencing the outputs is still a vital part of it.
And I think in a city, like the breaking down of silos is so important. Like we've become more and more specialised, and professionalisation of all these roles that we have that are really vital to cities sometimes creates a barrier to getting the right solutions. And I think it's really exciting that we're going to see that change, because as people experience different places and different faculties, and we're better to try it than at university, and like learn about each other, it will really influence, I think, the future of cities. And I think that's what's really interesting about the Internet of Things, because it is that mechanical, what is kind of very real, and then the very sort of intangible, making it really real and making it part of everyday lives.
And COVID has sped this thing up, actually, because the Internet, like contact tracing. Now there's a classic case. That's the Internet of Things. That's just people actually recording where they are and then having the data to work it out. And all of a sudden, people start saying, oh, we have other corresponding data sets in some other silo. And for example, private hospital bed silo and public hospital bed silo. Now they thought, ooh, we should put those together because COVID's really important. So now all of a sudden, that's a thing. So you've now got a hospital bed, wherever it is, doesn't matter, connected to people who might have COVID, etc. So that sort of collecting of data sets when it's needed for people who are authorised to take access to it, that's an opening. So Internet of Things creates a whole cornucopia of data sets. It's navigating how that works across silos is where transformation, where magic happens, if we know how to manage it. That's really exciting.
So just talking about that magic, I like that word a lot, especially when we're thinking about like the potential in terms of the cultural and the community sector. If we take the cultural first, a background as an artist, sort of using that creative energy, what do you see the opportunities are in that sector?
Yeah, look, I think culture is a really interesting thing to bring into the design of technology. It's something that I think about a lot. And my hope for the Internet of Things is that it can really contribute to diversity in the development of technology. So I had a really interesting conversation with a Lebanese mother recently, and she told me that her children grew up with the accent that her and her husband have, but since they've put their Google Home in their home, the kids have smartphones, the kids have actually adopted a more Anglo-Americanized accent to be able to get Siri and Google to understand them, and they have practiced this accent from YouTube videos online and now solely use that accent. So when it comes to, and that's primarily because Google and Siri have been trained by white Anglo-Saxon voices, mostly male voices. So I think, look, it's wonderful technology, but diversity in its development as well as in its application is incredibly important. And right now, a lot of these technologies are seemingly having quite a homogenizing effect, but they do have the capacity to also enhance different cultures. But I think that we need those different voices at the developmental stage as well as the end user stage. But I think there are fantastic opportunities for communities as well. The Internet of Things has this way of advocating and democratizing data. So in a democratizing sense, it makes available big raw data sets visualized in a very simplistic way for use for people who may not have had access to that data or the interpretive capacity prior to that. In an advocating sense, if we imagine a unit that measures how many people use a certain bike path and then it delivers that information to a local council, they can advocate for more cycle paths in their city because they have this raw data, rather than people writing in and saying, gee, I wish me and my partner could cycle around the city a little less dangerously so. So I think it does have, in terms of community and cultural sense, enormous, democratizing and advocacy capacity, but it is that homogenizing problem that I do have some concerns about, but it has the capacity to do good in that space too.
Yeah, it is. It's a classic good and bad thing.
Yeah.
I mean, on the good side, this idea of recognising, for example, environmental conditions, and so knowing where cool routes are or where good areas, and be able to make that information available to citizens to either avoid them or to do something about them, or to and to encourage councils to do something. Because if it's data based, but your thing about homogenisation is an interesting one, because the raw data is interesting, but it's the process, it's the developed data, the data upon which you put AI and machine learning that often provides really interesting insights. However, the majority of people designing that are homogenous. They're 25 to 40-year-old blokes, basically. And so our Human Rights Commissioner, Ed Santow, presented at one of our conferences last year, and he made the point that facial recognition from the biggies, I'm talking the really big companies, have an inherent bias where white males are identified something like 99% of the time, but if you're a non-white female, it can go below 90. Now, that can be a bad problem if you're trying to get through passport control. You know, there's no like, computer says no problem, it's not good. So we absolutely do need diversity in, because it's unconscious bias. I mean, I don't think people are consciously doing it. They're just saying, oh, well, this is, that's what a person looks like. And you're going,
the
well,
face I have.
Yeah, that's right. At least that's the people that I know look like. But that's not necessarily what they look like. And so we've got a lot of learning to do about how we actually unconsciously bias. And the thing about the Internet of Things and AI is that you build in your own biases, and we've got to somehow unlearn those. I'm not sure how you do it, but and maybe we can't unlearn them. Maybe we just need to ensure there is diversity about people who develop.
Yeah, I think we can only unlearn them from others, from people who are not like us, and working with people who are not like us.
Yeah.
So that has to happen at the beginning, and not at the user testing end when it's a little too late. It's already been released into the world. Yeah.
And what opportunities for the community do you see as the big opportunities for our community?
Oh, stacks. I mean, I've been involved in them with my UTS hat. I've been involved in a number of smart city projects, and I can tell you, people are dying to get to have their data made available. I mean, obvious cases are when they're near a big freeway. They want to know what the air quality is like, and they can't find out. Yeah. And I can tell you that, and so they're wanting to contribute. And in fact, I'm seeing an appetite for councils to get that information, because we want to sift the vexatious and the ill-informed from the real data would be really handy. Then we can make decisions based on fact. And so in the end, that's utterly vital. So, and then there are examples, some classic examples, that's earthquake in New Zealand, but also tidal waves in, we're really diverging widely here, in Indonesia. We're finding that the people information about what they see in aggregate is way more valuable often, not often, almost always, than actual individual sensing information. Because they get many points of view and data. And so it turned out that the sensing system, the Internet of Things sensing system that the Indonesian government put out there, didn't work because they weren't maintaining the buoys. But people are sitting there on the atolls and going, tidal wave coming. Tidal wave coming. Actually were more effective. So one, people information is really valuable. It's hyper-localized. It's where you are. Planning tends to be centralised and aggregated, and so you need a bottom-up as well as the top-down. And so citizen participation is really vital. Not all citizens care about that. Some do more than others, but where they can, really important.
And you see that the Internet of Things can facilitate that citizen information coming up?
Oh, absolutely. I think that they're participating anyway without knowing. So they're starting to know what their solar panels are doing. Right, because they've installed an inverter with the app, So and they're starting to have the home security stuff and everything else. They're anyway doing it. They're not calling it the Internet of Things. It is the Internet of Things, but they're already participating in that process. There's a concept that's now being created called the prosumer. I don't know if you've heard that, and that's the one where you're not just a consumer, you're a producer, and that's particularly in the model of electricity, but it can be the same in water. It can be the same in a whole lot of these areas where you start participating, and it's been in the old days. It was called bartering in the marketplace, right? So now we've been working on getting this top-down distribution method where people just get stuff. The Internet of Things may allow a bit of more bottom up. It may allow things, for example, for sharing excess food or distributing waste properly. There's a classic case that I really love, and I can't remember the name of it now. It won an IOT award. It was called My Lizzie or something like that. There are 100,000 homeless people in Australia, roughly. But one thing that I didn't know is that almost all of them have a mobile phone. And they don't have a mobile service because they can't afford the service, but they just use the free Wi-Fi. And they use a second-hand phone. And so a whole group of food distribution outlets have created an app that they can find where the food is. So they find the location of the food, and they triangulate it to the location of the homeless people. Now there's a classic case of well-meaning citizens and citizens who really need help working together through technology. That's just brilliant. Because half the problem in our world is simply finding things. We just don't know where the services are, and indeed if there is a problem, and there is a problem, we're almost bombarded with technology. I mean, I don't know about you, but I have more apps on my phone than I can deal with. So the answer isn't the app. The answer will be eventually something that's more visceral, an indicator of colour on your phone, a colour on your building that it's hot or something. It's not. I have to look up my app to see how hot it is in the room. Yeah. I think that's going to be very, late 20th century or early 20th century.
Yeah, I agree. We sort of see that arc in almost all technologies. So we sort of early 2000s went very much towards screens and everything's on the screen, and then we sort of realized very quickly that that's not the way that the body works, that's not the way that people work, and we very quickly introduced things like the Nintendo Wii, where people are moving again, or we're swiping, or whatever it was, re-involving our bodies and having things visualized in a way that isn't something obnoxious like a beeping sound or a flashing LED. I mean, these are very primitive acknowledgements of activity or information, and so I think when they just, shift a bit of furniture or turn a tap on or acknowledge that information in a way that's just tangible and inbuilt, I think that will be quite a relief from all of the endless notifications and flashing lights. So.
I like the mention of the wall that'll tell us, because it links straight back into your artwork that you talked about right at the beginning, of the students creating these smart walls that connect to the Internet of Things, and that's a nice loop there.
Yeah.
What do you both see, Frank, to start with, what do you see as the real kind of roadblocks or challenges to the kind of growth in the Internet of Things? Or do you not see any?
Oh, no, I see plenty. No, I mean, it's a bit nice rosy outside, but the difficulty is questions around security and around trust of data and use of data. So, the thing about the Internet of Things is it gives way more data, but how much, but privacy disappears, misuse opportunities increase, and so an authentication of where the data is really coming from, fake data. God knows, we've got fake news. Wait till we get to fake data. We're really going to be in trouble, especially if you start automating on fake data. So we've got to do a lot of work on really understanding and authenticating where it comes from, and classifying data in some ways in terms of source or provenance. There's the cybersecurity issue, of course, and the internet unfortunately has been designed as a sort of a complete Swiss cheese of security. It's just hopeless, and we've got pretty bad practices today. The Internet of Things will make that about 100 times worse, maybe more. Really, seriously. So I don't want to give you some of the bad stats, but there are some horrendous stats about what our susceptibility is, and we are buying devices today that we do not know are secure. The people selling them to us at Harvey Norman don't know they're secure or not. So we're building. So if we think, I don't know if you've heard of DDoS attacks. You probably have. This is this idea of having devices that have this little program in the little robot that, when activated, will just start sending requests to one site and take it down. So it took Netflix down, took a whole lot of things down. You do that to a bank, you do that to anything, it'll fall down. It literally will fall down. So we've got to work out how we make our devices more secure, and ultimately how the bargain or the trust that we build with people who share their data is how they understand it. So that's key. I mean, the good thing Australia is leading in some of this. The Productivity Commission came up with this recommendation for consumer data rights, which is pretty well leading. And this is this idea that customers can own and move their data between services, starting with banking, then electricity and telecoms, And I think then people will start understanding what their data actually means. Unfortunately, I think data is still a pretty abstract term. And so that's the start of the process, but we've got a long way to go for people to understand what it really means and for us to have trusted and understood methods for how we share it. And that's going to slow us down until we do, because we're going to be worried about it.
Couldn't agree more, Frank. Look, I think it's really easy for us to sweep up Internet of Things solutions into this ethical, sustainable, wonderful, exciting ball. But if we do a really basic urban political ecology, a bit of a deep dive into the origins of the components that are involved, for example, in the physicality of making these things. So if we just take one component that's common to every single communications switchboard for any one of these devices is coltan. So that's an essential mineral. Sorry, I wrote it down so I didn't mess it up. It's an essential metallic ore, and it's used in every one of these devices. Unfortunately, 80% of the world's coltan is mined in the Congo. It's mined by hand in what the UN has reported as slave-like conditions, and have repeatedly denounced these coltan mines, and the conditions that are involved in those mines. So that's just one component that is used in every single one of these small little computers and switchboards that we use for every single IoT solution, really. So I think that is a big barrier for us, and we are in this position of people who are involved in the design and the development of these technologies. It is our job to be advocates for sourcing sustainable, ethical components, as well as having ethical planning in the privacy and use of data. So I think both of those, both soft and hard materials, data, and the components that are involved in these projects and processes, I think just making sure we address those and source those ethically and sustainably is a really big issue.
Yeah, I think the other one is a behavioural one, which is really this idea that all the good things that are happening will only be available for those who get it, and will take a long time to make it simple enough for everyone to get it. So there's a slightly increasing danger of this digital divide problem. I know my mother's there. My mother's absolutely there. Yeah. So that's today. It's going to get harder until we make it easier. Yeah. And so we have to have the wit to do that. Yeah.
I think for me, that like making the data transparent in a way that's really easy to use, whatever part of. So for my organisation, the council, and for my community, it needs to be appreciable by the youngest to the oldest if it's going to be really valuable and really changing in terms of the whole community. Yep. And then the other missing link, I think, is sometimes the ability to analyse that data. So, we are surrounded by information, we are surrounded by data and opportunities, from Google Home, but do we really understand, these little devices that sit there and we think, they play Spotify for me and that's about it. But it's that kind of idea that, do we understand what it means? So that's back to your point about data and how we use it. But how do we kind of help people analyse it more, instantly and quickly, like we do other kinds of risks and opportunities that we come across in our lives and our cities?
I think there's something really in that analysis, and making sure that as data is representative of a lot of information, but it's not representative of all of the information. So it can have that homogenizing but also very reductive effect of speaking for a lived experience, or speaking for a population, or speaking for things that are inherently complex. So I think it's important as well that we don't think about things just as data sets, but understand that there is the empirical lived experience underneath that there are human beings that are experiencing things much more complicated than yes or no in that scenario too. So just including that in our analysis and understanding, and making space for the human side of things, I think is a big one too. Yeah,
look, I think there's going to be a whole relearning for children and for everybody, really. because when we're evidently doing things in ignorance about how we exhausting the planet and everything else, and yet we also have a propensity to believe what we read, or in fact what the data says, and so we're going to have to recalibrate that as we go further, you know, and you know, as our lived experiences are a smaller and smaller percentage of what actually is happening in the world, which is sort of the way we've progressed over the last thousands of years, we're going to have to recalibrate again to say, what does that really mean? How do we really empathise with someone who lives in a completely different circumstance and everything else? And this reduced data set doesn't represent them. So I really can't even guess how we can answer that question, but it's going to be, but it's a biggie. So, you know, opportunity, change, downside, it's all of it.
I kind of really feel, you know, we talked a lot about transformation, you know, and how I sort of wonder when that transformation will be really kind of perceived by everyone. How soon is there sort of like more that universal knowledge that I talked about from the oldest to the youngest? How soon will that happen? Will people kind of really realise that they're, you know, using the Internet of Things every day, and, you know, it's all around them, and what the opportunities for them as an individual are?
Well, you know, I think it'll be sooner than we think. I mean, and it happens without us actually recognising that it's happening. It's a bit like PC started, in the 80s, the internet started in the 90s, and mobile phones started in the 90s. You know, we're thinking, we don't even think about it. It's just what we do. And so I think it's a generational thing. So I think that, and I'm not sure that we'll still call it the Internet of Things, by the way. But I'd say that in the next 20 years, my granddaughter will just be using stuff and expecting the data to be available. She'll expect to know what the temperature is in and outside the house, whether the air quality is better inside or outside the house, etc. She'll just know that. My grandmother, my mother, she won't be alive then, but she will never know that. So we're going through this change, and I think there will be people who feel bewildered, I suspect, because the change is happening faster.
And you're working with a different generation, I guess, quite, you know, an almost narrow generation. And how do they respond? And, you know, what's the culture with your community?
So these guys are 19, 20, so they're almost digital natives. When I look at my niece, if there's a screen anywhere, her first intuition is to touch it. It's just to touch it. Which is very annoying for the people who have to clean the screens, but that's just an inherent quality to her. She doesn't think about this is a touch screen or it's not. She just thinks, here's a screen, I can interact with it. So I think, like many technologies, the Internet of Things will seep into people's reality long before they can label it or understand it as one thing or another. People think that artificial intelligence is this thing in the cloud that's coming for us, but actually it's embedded in so much of our lives already. So I think my students at the moment are pretty savvy to how quickly technology changes even in their lifetime, and for them the concept of connecting the internet in the real world, they're already catching Ubers to and from school, they're already getting Deliveroo dropped off. They've got one of them has an app called Pints in the Sun, and you can just find a place that's still sunny currently and go and get a beer and sit in the sun. And it just tracks, you know, the movement of the sun and places that might still be receiving sunlight at that point. So for them, this is just a bit of a second nature thing. It's and it is, but for them planning that and being aware of the many different skills that are involved in making that work in a way that's that works and keeps working, I think is something in itself. But yeah, it's already part of their consciousness, I think.
Just to wrap up, if there's one thing you want audience here to go away with about the Internet of Things, what would it be?
Can you answer that one? No? Oh.
He can go first.
I'll help you. For me, it's that concept of collaboration. I think, you know, we started with that, and, you know, the Internet of Things is clearly two things come together to transform life. But, you know, all of the things that you've said really kind of resonate with me in that, you know, when you make great cities, when you make great places, you know, it is always about these ideas coming together, and, you know, these concepts when they clash, you know, what comes out of it that's really exciting and interesting. And it gives me hope, because the risks and the challenges, you know, and the opportunities when they clash, you generally get at the better answer, the dialectic, if you like. Frank.
Okay, thank you. So, look, I think the opportunity for citizens to participate in the democratisation of data, for the sharing of it and the using of it, is going to be greater. So it's exciting for them, for us, and that means we need to embrace the good side, knowing that we have to understand what that means. And I think that being part of the change process is really important, because otherwise change will just be thrust upon everyone. And so what we need for it really to work is to have an informed citizenry. So and the pace of change is going so quickly. I would say learn about it as fast as you can, because if you're not influencing it, you'll be influenced by it. So I think that's probably an important message.
Yeah, I would second that message. I think that remaining critical but actively engaging with the Internet of Things is probably the best approach that you can have. So participating in it, but keeping that critical thinking about how is this feeding back into the world, where is my data going, and just being aware of some of those pitfalls that we've raised tonight. But being actively engaged means you can be part of that diverse group of people that are actively contributing and shaping this technology that's going to be so prolific. So I think that's really important. Yeah.
On that note, I think we're finished.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks
so much. That's been a fascinating conversation. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you very much.
Yeah,
It's been a pleasure.